I'm so thrilled today because today we're celebrating the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma. And it's an unusual expression, but it comes from the time when the Buddha went into that last removal of the veil of ignorance into full realization. And it was from our perspective, a new realization in terms of the history of the world. And so it said that the gods of India came to him with a diamond wheel and saying, please turn the wheel of the Dharma. You can imagine if we're in that non-conceptual space, how to put it into language was a little bit mystifying at first. And so the Buddha didn't teach for the first few days, but then when the gods of India requested him to turn the wheel of the Dharma, he gave the first talk at Sarnath in Deer Park on the Four Noble Truths. And particularly today, because it's a big turning of the wheel, probably not turning of the wheel. It is a big marker in His Holiness Chetsang Rinpoche's life. He's going into 3-year retreat in the next few days. And so he's leaving his publicly active life. But it's so appropriate to talk about him today for 2 reasons. One, because he was born on this holiday. His actual birthday is August 1st, but that year, since it's a lunar calendar, was this particular holiday. And then in terms of the lineage, turning the wheel means starting something. You can imagine if you turn a wheel, it sets something in motion. So when he decided to take up his responsibilities as head of the lineage, the Drikung lineage was almost extinct due to the diaspora from Tibet, the destruction in Tibet. There was simply chaos in India, and because the very highest lamas were not able to go in the first few refugees to India, no one was organizing the Drikung lineage, and it could easily have been entirely lost with all of the teachings. The founder of our lineage wrote something like 90 books. So the history, philosophy, empowerments of our lineage could have disappeared because they have to be passed person to person directly. So I know I've talked about some aspects of his life, but it's so different looking at the picture. So I'm going to switch to PowerPoint again, really to begin to comprehend the magnitude of what he has done. Let me see if I can. Okay. There we go. So here he is meditating. This is one of my favorite pictures, meditating in Sharvasti, where the Buddha spent so many years teaching, on the seat where the Buddha taught. But his life began when he was recognized as Chetsang Rinpoche. So imagine, he certainly came from a very famous family in Tibet, but imagine at 3 years old, here he is being put on a horse and traveling all the way to Lhasa. And here you see the procession. Not only in Lhasa, our main temple in Tibet was Drikung Til, and in Drikung Til is a very special statue. I believe an early Garchen Rinpoche made that statue, and it has been known to talk, and the great lamas are always given their first ordination in front of that statue. And here you see him just in his first monk's robes. And for those of you who have met His Eminence Tritsab Rinpoche, this is the previous incarnation of Tritsab Rinpoche. So in our system, we have designated Rinpoche regents who also reincarnate, and they're responsible for finding the Chetsang and Chunsang babies and making sure that those babies have the appropriate instructions and education. So many of us have met the current Tritsab Rinpoche. He's in his 40s, I think. But this is a picture of his previous life mentoring His Holiness. And then on the right are Chetsang and Chunsang Rinpoche when they were in the monastery as young people. So as a 3-year-old, he wasn't taken from his family, but he went back to be with his family and then came back to the monastery, I think maybe at 6 or 7 years old. And that's still very young, but that's when he would have begun his education. And he was only there a few years before the Chinese invasion was in full force. And it's the story that's told about him in those years is he was on the balcony and he could see, the army coming towards the monastery. And, I can't imagine as a, 7-year-old, how terrifying that must be. But the army approached and started banging on the gates, and everyone was sort of hiding in their rooms. But he said, no, we must go out. And he led the whole monastery out. And it said that he couldn't even find his belt in the dark. So he was clutching his robes and opening the doors of the monastery and leading all the other monks out to meet the future under Chinese occupation. So because he was from an aristocracy and a high lama, he wasn't put into schools, and he was just sort of ranging the streets of Lhasa, living in a hut with Chunsang Rinpoche, and they, were finding like a can and heating it over a butane stove for many years. And then the re-education program started, and Chunsang Rinpoche was jailed and tortured. And Holiness was put into a work camp. And in the work camp, he worked with cattle. So he has great fondness for cattle to this day. But there were years of famine in Tibet during that period. So it was a very, very difficult life and precarious, but he survived. And he became very respected and held responsibility in the work camp. So eventually, I think he was there almost 20 years. He was allowed leave to go see his family, and he decided that this was the moment that he would escape. And so it's, we can say he walked through the mountains, but I'm not sure where the camp was, but this shows the route from Lhasa over the Himalayas. And he knew that people would get in trouble if they helped him. So he walked alone. Again, when I look at his life and try to imagine really what that must have been like, it's hard for me to imagine walking alone through the mountains, where they got maps, I don't know, but walking all the way through Tibet to Nepal, and then in Nepal, there would have been ground transportation to India. But doing that as a very, very young person, alone. So, we see all these great lamas, and that period of life is behind them, and it's really good to really take into our minds what they have gone through to survive personally and to help the Dharma survive. So he made it to Dharamsala, And the Dalai Lama said, well, you know, he's 26 or so, maybe 24, 25. You know, I can't force you to take up your duties, but there isn't anyone else who can lead this lineage and pull it together. So he said he wanted to first visit his family, and then he would choose to shoulder the immense responsibility for the Drikung lineage. And his family at that time were refugees, and they were doing whatever they could do to survive. So his parents were in the US serving as translators for a doctor. So he came to the US and decided, well, while he's here, he should learn English. And so he got a job at McDonald's to learn English. And after a while, he said, now it's time for me to go back to India. And they said, oh, we'll give you your own franchise, stay. But of course, he came back to begin his lifetime of duties. He has been actively pulling the Drikung lineage into the future for 50 years. 50 years of dedication to that. So they decided that what he needed to do first as he began his duties was to go into 3-year retreat. And we might imagine that more idyllic than it is. Here are some of the retreat huts in Lama Yuru, and here they are at the end of the retreat. But, you know, they're practically caves. There's no running water. There's no, you know, gardens of fresh vegetable. There's sampa and, you know, very austere conditions. And at the same time, what a joy it must be to go from a work camp into embodying the spiritual life again. Having completed his 3-year retreat, then he began the extraordinary process of creating the Drikung lineage from the ground up. So on the left, you see just an empty field. That's all there was. Someone helped him buy land and gave him a little bit of money, and he built one teeny tiny house. I've been in that house, and it's a 2-story house that's smaller than the living room in my condo. But over the years, they were able to build the first monastery, Zhangchubling. And, you know, in the first few years, of course, there weren't teachers from our lineage. And so here he is personally teaching Tibetan grammar to the young students. And what he did is started with a first class, really of very few, maybe 5. And those first monks, then one became his helper with buildings and grounds, one became the dean of the new college and a teacher. So each of the early classes took responsibility for expanding the capacity to create the philosophical education system. So on the right, you see the first monastery, Zhangchubling, which fit 200 monks. And then behind the monastery was a nunnery. And at that time, the first group of nuns also lived in a teeny tiny house, and there were only 5 of them. But later that was expanded, and now I think there are about 100 nuns and a capacity for 100. And, you know, when I think of what he accomplished, it went from Zhangchubling to there in the background on the right is the Songston Library, which is a library for the wealth of Himalayan history and tradition. And in front is the new Kagyu College. So it went from the undergraduate education to, let's say, a doctorate, huge library, a 3-year retreat center. And as you know, I had the privilege to work on the library, which was an extraordinary experience for me, to live in India for a year. And I was responsible for all the art. But while I was supervising the arts, here in the middle, you see this is the second story. This is a Chenrezig temple, or actually I think it's the third story. This statue was in pieces and had to be sanded and put together. I had to direct all the furniture to be made. There were huge tankas covering the ceilings that had to be painted. This giant 2-story elaborate door, finding artists and getting them underway. And I had a year, and while I was supervising all of the arts, I personally created this bronze statue. So it was quite a wild year, and another time I'll tell you the full story of that year. But what he wanted to do particularly was to preserve a fuller history. And he became very interested in the Dunhuang caves, because those caves were in a section of Tibet where people hid history books behind false walls and then painted over them. And then the whole area was covered in sand and wasn't discovered till the early 1900s. In the meantime, there had been Mongol invasions of Tibet and, waves of invaders, waves of destruction in the monasteries, and a great deal of the history was lost. So he wanted to preserve the art and history for the Tibetans because in a refugee culture, you tend to hang on to what you know, and it's hard to take in that it was different at one time. And so the statue, the clothes on the statue and this is King Songtsen Gampo. These were all taken from paintings in the Dunhuang caves. And His Holiness wrote a huge history of Tibet that included, different views of, different kings and what they accomplished. And like evil King Dharma wasn't actually evil. So it helped the Tibetans have an entirely different picture. And the library functions today as a conference center and library. So that's when I first started working directly with His Holiness. I first met him in 1993, and my first ordination was from him, and then I began working on the library for him in 2003. So meeting him, my whole life changed. I pretty quickly, in 93, I met him. In 94, I went to India for the first time. And in 97, I took my first ordination. This is a very famous picture, an early picture. I'm sorry, it's a little pixelated, but it shows Khenchen Koncho Gyaltsen, Drikung Rinpoche, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and His Holiness Chetsang Rinpoche. So after the education was underway, he started passing the lineage, and there was such worldwide demand. Someone like Khenchen Koncho Gyaltsen came to America. Goodness, I think he came to America in the 70s. And so there were key people on the European continent and the US, and gradually Drikung centers spread to almost every continent. But the passing of the lineage looked like this. There were gigantic gatherings that lasted some for months at a time. And on the right is a huge professional tent was erected. But in the early days, a canopy would be put over the courtyard of John Chubling, and he would sit on the steps of the temple. And sometimes one of the main passing of the lineage around the time I was ordained, I think it was 5 months of 50 empowerments a day and lungs, or reading of some of the great texts, for days and days and days at a time. So every single book and every single text has to be personally passed, or it's considered dead. So the main texts that I teach were read so that there was a continuous lineage, and every single empowerment is passed that way. And we'd be sitting in these gigantic assemblies. So you can imagine, just backtracking, the great diaspora, people were escaping Tibet, carrying what they could on their backs. So Holiness spent years going to library after library, collecting lost texts all over the world, Russia, US, Europe, and he would go to great lamas, particularly Digyal Khyentse Rinpoche, who held in his mind body some of the main empowerments of the Drikung, and collect these cycles of Drikung empowerments. And then I was there to witness His Holiness doing the same thing for other lineages. As a child, he would have received a cycle of, let's say, Taglung Kagyu, and then passed that to the young Taglung Rinpoches. So there was this historic gathering and collecting. And even while we were there in the 90s, you know, a Nyingma Lama would send one missing text that he found in Canada, and they would give the empowerment the next day, or the reading of that book the next day, until all of the living Sangha, the great teachers who are teaching now, had all the cycles of the empowerment. So we're able to do, you know, the great things that some of you go out to Arizona for Chakra Samvara and some of the other great retreats, because they were collected and passed. Every single one of them. And, you know, all the teaching lamas you know right now, as young people were sitting receiving, and then were sent to the Almora Retreat Center to do their 3-year retreat, so that now as you know, the middle-aged active lamas, they're able to pass these. So the lamas in their 40s and 50s were part of this huge passing, and then a series of retreats that His Holiness Chetsang Rinpoche made possible. And then I thought it would be fun to focus on, you know, how we're personally connected. This was one of the Sharavasti retreat teachers training. I wasn't at the first, but I was at the second, third, and fourth teacher trainings. So this was the second one at the Garchen Institute in Taiwan. And it's so rare, you know, going back to mostly experiencing holiness in these gigantic assemblies to 40 people. It was so intimate and so beautiful. And he had the same joy passing the Sharavasti teachings that I see in his face when he, in the early days, teaching the young monks personally when there were just a small group. So it was just stunning to be there and receive this teacher's training. The second one was in Malaysia, and then the third one was in the great temple of Sharavasti. So when I get to this part of Holiness's life, so it's impossible to talk about all of his accomplishments because it's been so vast. So one of his projects was to build the Sharavasti temple. And then he gave this fourth exceptional expansion of the training there in 2023. But in the weeks beforehand, as you know, we had the Sharavasti monastic Varsa. The first one was for Theravadan monks, and the second one which we Vajradakini organized, was for nuns. So you see myself and Holiness meeting in California just before COVID struck, which caused it to be postponed. And here we are in Taiwan, meeting the great Taiwanese bhikshunis who, one from Dharma Drum would be our major teaching abbess at the Nuns Varsa. It was, again, a wonderful time for me to work directly with him and see how vast his mind was. So, traveling all of these places to organize it, and then seeing that the cancellation due to COVID, from his perspective, wasn't a giant obstacle. It's, the shifting of karma has changed, and waiting for the causes and conditions for it to come together so it can arise again. So many times I've witnessed this phenomena. For instance, I was meeting with him in California, and he had come from a previous meeting because he wanted to create a huge park in Charvasti in which he was going to inscribe the whole Tibetan Kangyur, several hundred volumes, in stone. Then he created the Charvasti temple, but couldn't get the land for the park. And it's just been announced now that the park with a labyrinth with the Kangyur carved in stone is going to arise in Bhutan. So it's more moving through time and space, seeing what causes and conditions open a door, and having everything ready, the people, the dream, the vision, ready to pass through whatever energetic door in life opens. Not giving up, but not getting discouraged, and not viewing change as an obstacle. And concurrently, the last 10 years of his life have had an environmental focus. So in 2015, he was talking about, more fully in the next 10 years, focusing on the Dharma while he completed the activities that the lineage needed to move into the future. So here he is standing. These are 3,000-year-old trees in Taiwan. So they would have been on the planet at the same time of the Buddha. And I've been to that forest. It's incredible. And here he is in Ladakh working with yak livestock. So he has, so many projects under the Go Green phenomena. This is one of the tree planting projects of Go Green. And he got, whole villages of people to plant trees. I think at this point, they planted over 100,000 trees. And on the right is an orchard. So here you can see Ladakh is like a moonscape. And Ladakh was becoming almost uninhabitable because they were dependent on the glacier water. And due to climate change, there were fewer and fewer glaciers surviving to come and irrigate the crops that were grown in a long, narrow green valley. So he discovered this school teacher was trying to teach children about making ice stupas. And so he energized that project and brought in money and brought in a whole scale shift. So it's designed so that they, in the winter, create these ice stupas near the crops, and then the stupas slowly water the crops during the summer months. But due to his leadership and charisma, he could unite the army, the villages, and the monks and nuns to work together to put this plan into motion, as well as bringing in world money. And one of the concerns of Ladakh is in becoming a worldwide phenomenon, Tibetan medicine has not been able to get the plants to make the medicine. And of course, people can't go into Tibet to gather the herbs. And so this is a recent project creating the largest herbal garden in Ladakh, which has the altitude to grow the Tibetan medicinal plants so that Tibetan medicine will survive into the future. And this was the most recent gathering in, I think it was last summer. So as he's leaving for retreat, he was giving final cycles of esoteric empowerments. And this is at Trisab Rinpoche's monastery in Nepal, where, if you remember early in the slideshow, I showed you a picture of Drikung Rinpoche, the great Mahamudra master, who spent most of his life in retreat, where his body was put into a stupa. And you can see it went from the 5 initial students to, hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world coming to get the last series of empowerments. And he has now arrived in Bhutan, and I was in touch with him recently, and he said that his retreat will begin August 4th, in a few days. And that he would keep, of course, all of us in his prayers. So it's hard to give a sense of the enormity of his significance in our lives, in that everything that we study comes through his efforts at preserving the lineage, teaching the lineage. Carol has been through the 3-year retreat system, all of the empowerments and the training of Drupal Rinpoche to lead and guide the retreat came from his careful care and building of the resources. Carol had the privilege to go to Lachi. Lachi is one of the Drikung sacred places on the planet. And I was in an assembly in the 90s when the mayor and delegation came from Lachi to Holiness saying, for 600 years, Drikung sent meditators to Lachi. Please send meditators again, and I will, we, the village, will provide the food. So all of the things that exist in the Drikung lineage, outside of Tibet, are due to his efforts. There's no way to express really how everything I touch has come from his kindness at creating the conditions for the Drikung to survive, for qualified teachers to be there, qualified retreat masters to be there, all the texts we need, all the empowerments we need, and this extraordinary Shavasti training that is so beneficial for us in this day and age, that prepares us really for future Vajrayana studies. So, Annie, if you want to put the prayer book up, let's repeat his long life prayer, maybe an auspicious 7 times. We'll go back and do all the prayers, but embodiment of the 3 precious jewels, Padma Pani, who holds the teachings of the Victorious One, seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. Embodiment of the three precious jewels, Padmapani, who holds the teachings of the victorious one, seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. Embodiment of the three precious jewels, Padmapani, who holds the teachings of the victorious one, seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. Padmapani refers to the bodhisattva aspect of Chenrezig, the emanation of compassion, and he's considered an emanation of Chenrezig. And his name, Trinley Lundrup, is spontaneously established activities. That's a direct translation of his name. But you can see how he is considered someone who has the capacity to spontaneously establish in his activities. Embodiment of the three precious jewels, Padmapani, who holds the teachings of the victorious one, seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. Embodiment of the three precious jewels, Padmapani, who holds the teachings of the victorious one, seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. Embodiment of the three precious jewels, Padmapani, who holds the teachings of the victorious one, seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. Embodiment of the three precious jewels, Padmapani, who holds the teachings of the victorious one, seeing the all-goodness meaning with the wisdom eye, may you who are spontaneously established activities live long for hundreds of kalpas. So if you want to unshare. So I know, unlike the Dalai Lama, most of you have not had the opportunity to meet His Holiness so often in your lives, although some of you have. And he only has 2 translated books in English, The Giant History of Tibet and The Practice of Mahamudra, which I often refer to when I'm teaching. He's also written from the Dunhuang scrolls, teaching a book on Tibetan Zen, but that hasn't been translated into English yet. However, he has created the Giant Sharvasti teaching manual. Giant in the sense it's a personally composed drawing from all aspects of the Dharma for our use in these days. But I wanted you to have a sense of him, particularly in this moment. We hope we'll be alive to see him when he comes out of 3-year retreat, but really with joy, rejoicing in him going into retreat and wishing him long life and strength to complete his spiritual activities in retreat. So this was a small portion of his life. There's just so much I could tell you about his activities. There's so much more, but it's beyond a short presentation. But I wanted to give you a chance to respond, or if you've had a chance to meet him, or a aspect you'd like to share, or a expression of gratitude, you're welcome to join in. Barbara.
Oh, Camel, that was just wonderful. Oh, why is it saying sharing's not turned on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, all right. That was just wonderful. I'm very emotional right now, seeing all that. And I remember when we went to India with, I can't even think of his name, Anto Rinpoche, and he brought us to his monastery. When we went by the course, he talked all about you. Not Chetsang Rinpoche, but Antra Rinpoche, you know? And so I always remember that was my first introduction into the monastery, you know? I don't think I've seen that other. I forget what the other statue was. That
Oh, the
you
Chen
had.
Reisig, up at the top, on top of the library. There's a temple.
Oh, I did. Yes, I did. Now that I think of it. Oh my gosh. And you know, I could never do art until I met you. I remember in the nunnery, you know, me and Ani sitting there doing art. She's showing us how, and I was like doing nothing, you know. And I think you gave me the empowerment. But yeah, I've met him several times, and I was very leery of him. I was afraid of him, you know. And now when you're talking, I'm thinking, why was I so afraid? But I was. But thank you.
Sue, you had your hand up.
Yes, that was just profound. I was so captured by the pictures and, you know, your description. And then I had this moment of pure joy because when Barb and I were there and we were in his monastery, we did go to the library because it had opened up like a couple years before or something. So we saw the library. But when you said you were there in 2003, correct?
Mhm.
That's when we were there
Mhm.
in his library. And here you were there then. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was such a blessing for me to hear that you were there at the exact time we were there. And anyway, I do wonder, is there a book written about his life?
There's a book, but it Heart of Tibet is his biography, but it ends before this whole period of all the environmental works.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a more of a picture book, but again, it is just like the first half of his activities. I'm sure someone will start creating, because a lot of this was before instant cameras and before the cloud, and now it'd be so much easier to put a book together.
Yeah, that would be wonderful because I've always been very interested in history, any kind of history, and I've been recently rereading the history of Padmasambhava
Mhm.
and all the disciples, and it just is so comforting to know the history of something and how it all came together, the cause and effect and everything. So I'm just really happy you did this today. I'm just thrilled to be here. And I just thank you so much for being the wonderful teacher you are. Okay.
Thank you. Someone else had their hand up, but it's not clear now. So someone else wanted to.
DKDC Madison.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Yes, Sister Sophie, please.
Yes, sorry, I didn't realize my name was that way. Rinpoche has made it. The Drikung lineage really seems like a family, very small family,
Mhm.
and just his kindness, the way he works with people, and kind of remembers people. He came to Madison, and he stayed at Alexis's house.
Mhm.
And then he didn't see her for 20, 30 years. And we went to see him in Chicago. And as he was leaving, you know, this full room of people, he makes sure he stops and says hello to Alexis. And he remembers her, you know, and he remembers our little group. So I just find that that is the beauty of Drikung, is that it's a very intimate, very small little thing that gets big. And then there's a time when he was walking in Madison, which has a lot of mosquitoes, and his whole arm was just filled with mosquitoes. And he just let them stay there. That's the kindness of him. So thank you for the presentation, and we really are fortunate to have this lineage.
And we've been fortunate, you know, many of you, including me, have been fortunate to meet some of these lamas before they were worldwide figures, when we were able to, you know, have conversations, intimate one-on-one conversations with them. You know, now, you know, each of the greats has hundreds of thousands of students worldwide. So, and they were, you know, the old minds uninfected by Western world garbage, trained before that hit them. Carol, you wanted to say something.
I'm sorry I couldn't find the little hand thing. I'm just so moved by this, and thank you for reminding me of my connection with him as well. I mean, with all of our connections with him, I just remember so many adventures that we had at the library, and when you told me about how they got the statue from, you know, here to there, and all the telephone poles that had to come down. I mean, the things that, you know, we sort of take for granted, putting buildings up or getting people together or organizing things, were just not available. And so there's a layer of difficulty that he's clearly been able to so gracefully and so magnanimously move through. And you know, it's kind of like when we were at a monastery, a nunnery, and the nuns said, "Oh yeah, we made this," and you look around and there's no large machinery, and they say, "Yeah, we moved the rocks," and you see them like rock by rock these things are built, and you know, you complain about the grocery store not having whatever, and you have no idea the difficulty of creating or making any of these things, and the beauty of those people that he embodies. You know, just as the story was told, remembering people, the kind of person to person, the kind of community, the kind of sharing, the magnanimous way of living as a baseline that we in the West have really lost. But it's just so wonderful to see the joy in his face, from a little guy to a medium guy to a large guy to an older guy. It just continues right through the visual storyline, and I want to get together and make a book about this.
Oh, good.
So I don't know if it'll happen, but thank you so much for the time that you took, and also your joy in showing your deep connection with him is beautiful. So thank you.
One of the things, you know, that his capacity not to be only from his own culture, and to really see what other cultures need, and how to invite them and open doors for them. You know, some people understand their own culture and they can't imagine how other cultures think. But one of the kindnesses that I remember in the 90s, when he was going to have this big, many month long thing, he built Western bathrooms. He created just outside the monastery, like a set of 6 bathrooms, so that the Western people who came, in the Ladakis were all there, and they just built a trench, but the Westerners wouldn't have been comfortable. And so just sort of knowing, running 3, all right, this is the Western food, the Ladakhi food, the Tibetan food, the Rinpoche food, how to not, fill every egotistical need, but what conditions do people need to be together and have their minds settled enough that they can receive the teachings and not be, distressed. And then later, as, maybe in the 2000s, this was the best part. And he would have like a dessert party before the teaching started. And the same was true with the Sharvasti teachings. They would lay out all these sweets, because they know other cultures like sweets, like tables of sweets. And sometimes it would turn into a big party, and then the teachings would start the next day. But what made me laugh at the Sharvasti teachings in Taiwan is like, there are all the sweets, but they didn't give us time to eat them because they don't care about them. And for me, all these chocolate cakes, what? No, we have to stand up now. It gave me a laugh. Anyway, it's just so interesting to see, the details that he thinks of. And so this is your family. And now he's going into retreat, part of which I assume has to do with the spiritual capacity to be reborn as a Rinpoche in the next life and resume his duties. Kathy, you have your hand up.
Just a quick comment that this was my introduction to Rinpoche, and I really appreciated it greatly, and need to be reminded of what Rinpoche, the word means, and also Shravasti. That would be helpful.
So Rinpoche is one of those funny words where it's a title when it's someone who's clearly a reincarnation, let's say a tested reincarnation. But then it's also a term of endearment towards lesser teachers. So many teachers you see have the word Rinpoche, and not all of them are recognized reincarnation. And Shravasti is a city in India. Again, it was nothing. It was an empty field. And India decided it was one of the holy places that hadn't been developed, like Bodh Gaya. And so they offered sections of land to all the different lineages. And Holiness raised the money and built this gigantic temple, as well as committed to annual programs there, because he felt the city was so poor, it would also benefit more like a village than a city, both to preserve the holy place and to benefit the people there.
And how old is he now this year?
80. This is his 80th birthday.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So we will see him again 3 years from now.